Today on the Daily Dose, pandemic cholera. Characterized by nausea, vomiting, and copious bouts of diarrhea, up to 5.5 gallons a day. Untreated cholera patients soon become dangerously dehydrated. Nearing death, victims display the classic cholera physiognomy of puckered blue lips and cadaverous, sunken facial features. Children between the ages of 2 and 4 hold the dubious distinction of the highest rates of infection. Rooted in the Indian subcontinent, cholera became one of the most widespread and deadly diseases of the 19th century, taking the lives of an estimated 30 million people worldwide. Cholera remained a geographically isolated disease until the start of the 19th century, when the first pandemic struck Bengal, India in 1816. By 1824, religious pilgrims, soldiers, and traders had transported the disease into Southeast Asia and China, then onward to the Russian border and east into Japan. It then followed trade routes into the Persian Gulf, decimating present-day Iran before marching across the Ottoman and Russian empires. By 1826, cholera threatened to enter Europe, but as quickly as the epidemic began, the disease subsided after reaching Astrakhan near the Caspian Sea. The second, third, and fourth waves of cholera epidemics were far less merciful than the first. It is estimated that in India alone, 8 million people died from cholera between 1900 and 1920. In 1854, English physician John Snow was the first to identify the importance of contaminated water as one of the causal vectors of cholera transmission. A year later, he published 2 groundbreaking field studies, which demonstrated that improper sewage containment was responsible for 2 epidemics that crippled parts of London in 1854. Despite early skepticism by many in the medical community, as the science of microbiology developed over the next 30 years, mounting evidence would prove that Snow's original assumptions were correct. Developed cities began to make heavy investments in water treatment facilities positioned well away from sewers and waste containment structures. As a result, cholera epidemics ended in direct relationship to infrastructure improvements. In 1883, while traveling in Egypt with German colleagues, Robert Koch came face to face with cholera when an epidemic broke out in Alexandria. Following necropsies of the dead, Koch and his team found a bacillus in the intestinal mucosa of persons who had died from cholera. Late in 1883, Koch requested authorization for his team to sail to Calcutta, India to investigate a second cholera outbreak. This time, on January 7, 1884, Koch announced to the world that he had isolated and identified the Vibrio cholerae bacillus as the bug responsible for the disease. Koch and his team returned to Germany as national heroes. First tuberculosis, the headlines announced, now cholera. The science world would later discover that Italian anatomist Filippo Pacini had isolated and identified Vibrio cholerae almost 30 years earlier while working at the University of Florence. However, Koch and the science world at large remain unaware of Pacini's discovery due to inadequate publication of his results. In 1900, Russian-born bacteriologist Waldemar Hofkin developed the first vaccine against the disease. Combined with improved sanitation infrastructures in most major cities, cholera epidemics have remained largely in check throughout the world. The last major outbreak in the United States occurred in 1910, while an outbreak in 1947 Egypt took the lives of 20,000 victims. In 2010, after a massive earthquake left Haiti with an enormous homeless population and an almost non-existent sanitation system, cholera struck down over 250 lives when an outbreak erupted in Port-au-Prince. As the Haitian outbreak belies, When given the opportunity, Vibrio cholerae remains a lethal, unseen enemy even to this day.
And there you have it, the filth disease cholera, today in the Daily Dose. Get your nerd on with the Daily Dose. And if you enjoyed today's episode, share the link with a friend or colleague, particularly the dumb ones that don't know jack.